by Leo the Lion and David Pusek. The forest is filled with death. The forest lay silent. The survivors murmured in a low voice even between themselves, like they were expecting someone to hear them. Every day their numbers dwindled. There were less and less of them. The last time they lost people to some strange insects that were crawling around on a rock. Whatever they did, the escapees didn't listen, like they were in some kind of trance, or were hypnotized by the animals. Some of them found their way back, but their memories were just a haze. Some of the remaining survivors built small, slow-burning fires in the camp. It was hard to find anything that would burn normally in the damp, dark woods. It was like there was death in everything, so thick that it even killed the fire. Large puffs of smoke and the smell of slowly cooking meat came from the campfires. They managed to find some small rodents and vermin that looked ordinary enough to be eaten. They soon learned which ones were safe to consume and which to avoid, as a good chunk of the group fell ill after a feast. Some of them even died. Roger was hoping that the smell of food would bring back the starving wanderers. Next to him was a man named Gabriel that he trusted very much. Robert would describe him as someone of African descent, but Gabriel has never heard of Africa. He has never heard of America either, or Britain, or Russia. He didn't even know of Australia. And everyone knows about the homeland of Australia, at least where Roger came from. But only him and his wife were the remaining people from his world. Based off of his estimates, it seemed like, at the start, their party was divided into 5 groups from 5 worlds. Now, after losing so many people, he was not sure. But from among his new friends, he and his wife were the only ones who knew about these countries. They had no idea how they understood each other, as they must have spoken completely different languages. Roger thought that they spoke English, and for everyone else it felt like they were speaking the same language as their native countries. But when he looked at their mouths moving or listened closely to the sounds they made with their vocal cords, it made him nauseous. It must have been some kind of illusion. Some kind of illusion orchestrated by the mysterious figure about whom everyone knew, except everyone from his world. When he tried to ask for more information about this character, he got too many answers. It was called Mayhem, the mind behind this experiment. From what he was told, this was a regular thing that this character Mayhem did. He would kidnap people, put them in a dangerous situation to varying degrees, and then give them all rewards based off their performance. Rewards being points that they could use to buy items from a store that he ran. Although it seemed more like a smuggling ring than a store. They weren't even sure if it was a he or a she, or if Mayhem even had a gender. It was easier, though, to think about him as a man. There was no information about his race or even if he was human at all. Every part of him was ambiguous, but the others at least knew about him. But not Roger, or his companions for some reason. We were kept in the dark. Although some floated around the idea that he couldn't be everywhere, perhaps he had only just arrived at Earth, and his party were the unfortunate people to be his first victims. Roger thought hard and long about the situation to figure out where these people came from. He had the idea that they were all from Earth, just from different parallel timelines. One night he talked with Gabriel about it. Roger was not an astronomer, but it turned out the night sky of Gabriel's world was completely different. He spoke to some other people and they confirmed his suspicions, when they reported worlds with different constellations or without a moon. It seemed humanity thrived not just on Earth, but several planets in the universe or in an unimaginably grand multiverse. When he thought about it, it made his head hurt. Roger threw some new wood onto the fire, which gave off more smoke than either heat or light. Gabriel was methodically turning a skewer with a piece of amorph meat on it. One of the most numerous species around were the globs, as they called them. They came in many colors and various shapes. They were little animals which uselessly rolled around under the thick undergrowth. They looked like random pieces of flesh and were quite easy to capture. "These are the fruits of these blasted lands," Gabriel said once when they were gathering them. "Why would you say that?" Roger asked. "Say what?" "Blasted. Such a strange word to use for this kind of stuff." Roger meditated on the word. "You haven't read The Color Out of Space, have you?" "It means it's fucked, just worse," Gabriel explained solemnly. Well, a lot of their phraseology didn't make sense, but at least they could understand each other. It must be cultural differences, he assumed, or a translation error in whatever mystical force was translating for them. It didn't happen particularly often, but on occasion they were prone to not understand one another. A woman approached Roger sitting next to him and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Is there any more food done?" she asked. "A lot of people in the camp are hungry. I haven't been able to find any medicine for the sick ones, but hopefully when we get to the shelter we can find some. I made a list of everything I think we need. Hopefully it's the right stuff." It was his wife, Anna, of course. They went through thick and thin together back in the world where they were coming from. Anna was a real caring type. Roger never knew a person gentler than her. It was a cruel twist of fate that she had to follow him to the one place where he wished she would not come with him. When Roger's father died, she said she was going to go wherever he goes. Only death can keep them apart, and maybe not even that. She stayed true to her word, coming to these blasted lands with him. Her words began to pull Roger out of his memories. He took a moment to think about it, but before he could answer, she asked him another question. "Will they come back?" she asked. "All those people who wandered off and lured away as though hypnotized by those strange creatures. Do you think they'll ever return?" Roger could hardly hear her low whispering over the sound of the sizzling pieces of meat. He looked at Gabriel in response, hoping to get some support from his Kenyan friend. Instead, he turned away and went to break some of the twigs they had gathered into smaller pieces for the fire. One could see the muscles moving under his skin as he worked shirtless. He was a strong man, most likely the strongest amongst all the survivors, but there were things he couldn't handle. "He is strong but not tough," Anna once said to Roger, after they saw some of their fellow survivors torn to shreds by some monstrosity from under the ground. Gabriel completely broke down and didn't speak for days. He was not good with his own nor others' emotions. Still not looking at his wife, instead looking around the camp, making a mental note of how many they have lost today, he finally answered, "I don't know, honey. A handful of them managed to return already. I don't know if the rest will. We can only hope for the best." They hoped for the best for days, as he could tell. Maybe it was over a week now, or several weeks. He was quite sure it was not months yet. At first it was hard not knowing what time it was, when a new day started, as the constant glow coming from over the canopy never changed. But you can get used to stuff pretty quickly. When most of them felt tired, they stopped and rested. When everyone was well rested and not hungry anymore, they'd move out again. The light was not bright enough to make it hard for them to sleep, and it was not dark enough that it would hamper them from moving forward without torches. Roger pulled out his phone and looked at the map. There was a safe place nearby where they could rest for the night, but they were not able to reach it as they had to stop to wait for the others. This caused discomfort for many of the survivors. They wanted to be in safety, and now they were stuck outside. To add to their problems, they were low on supplies. Roger could have had the supplies delivered to them by teleport, but it would have cost a fortune. It was better to get to the camp as soon as possible and resupply there. He started browsing through the inventory. He quickly put the phone away. There were noises in the surrounding bushes, and he switched to flight or fight mode instantly. He saw the rest of the camp rising from behind their campfires and reaching for their makeshift weapons. People quickly armed themselves with clubs, spears, and the lucky ones with machetes or axes, and waited for the new horror to emerge from the woods. It was Kevin who came out of the bushes, leaning down, panting like he'd sprinted 1,000,000 miles. Everyone took a deep breath and relaxed as they let it out and lowered their weapons. Only some stayed tense. They were the ones who were thinking about what he was running from. Eventually, they've let their weapons down too, and followed the others in giving a welcome hug to the still panting Kevin. The last one to go was Gabriel. "Welcome back, brother," he said after, while holding his hand in a handshake. "It's good to have you back. Thought you were gone for good." "I thought so too. Those little insects. I still can't stop thinking about them. It felt like I was not myself, like I was hypnotized. I just felt that I wanted to follow them." They led us to some deep, dark cave. The rest, they just followed them inside. I think they won't be coming back. Somehow, I just snapped out of it. It must have been the fear. The whole thing that I was following, some fucking bug, seemed so surreal. I couldn't save them. He just broke down in tears, hugging Gabriel, who was disturbed by the whole situation. But he would never leave a friend to struggle alone. Roger cleared his throat to gain attention and raised from beside the campfire. He was a natural-born leader. People looked up to him, for guidance, for comfort, for someone to follow. He spoke only a notch louder than the whisper the survivors used between themselves, but it still sounded like thunder in the quiet forest. "Let's still stay here for a while. There may be others who will make it back here. We'll wait for that to happen. Also, the food is not ready. We need it to regain our strength. We made some good progress today despite the losses. Let's be patient. We're safe here for the time being," he said, and the others nodded. A small group mumbled between themselves, but it was only 5 people. They were kind of outsiders, as much as one could be in such a small group. Airi, a woman who Roger only thought about as Japanese, although she was not from his world, so she had no idea there was a country called Japan in some faraway place, lifted a small kettle from the fire and poured hot water on some tea leaves. "Tea is almost ready, everyone. Let's stand in line. Everyone will get some," she said. "That's a great idea," Anna said, moving over to help her, with the great care she always had for such things. Roger looked at her, and he felt sad that she had to be here, but in his heart, in the deepest places, he was relieved that she was with him. She gave comfort to him and someone who he knew he could rely on. And this was something everyone loved about her. Airi had some tea leaves with her. That was a personal item, but her supplies were dwindling. They found a plant which didn't look that alien and had a nice aroma. She was mixing them together, but the blend became more heavily dominated by the strange plant, which the survivors only referred to as tea. People ran back for their makeshift weapons hastily when they heard the rustling of leaves, the breaking of twigs, and shouting. From the woods came Anastasia, a tall, strong woman with braided blonde hair. She was waving around frantically with her hands. "Get them off! Get them off! Get them off me!" she yelled while running towards the encampment. People lowered their weapons, and again, you could almost feel the weight of anticipation being lifted. After just a moment, they realized why she was waving and yelling. Anastasia tried to get off the little creatures that mesmerized so many of the group. Why it was that some people were able to break free and others weren't, nobody understood, but they were happy to see one of their companions returned. Her leg, arms, and every exposed part of her body was attacked by them, and blood was soon covering her. They rushed to her aid, and together they managed to smite the creatures. They were resilient, their armor was strong, and their bites fierce. "Thank you," Anastasia, a Slavic-looking woman, said as she started to wipe away the blood from herself. The wounds were shallow, and she refused anyone who wanted to treat them. Her voice was commanding. She'd served in the army. She was an officer before Mayhem kidnapped and transported her here with the rest of them. She tended to the wounds herself. Anna was the only one capable of getting anywhere near her, merely holding a box of supplies for her. That was the most she would allow anyone to help. "Is anyone still alive?" Roger asked her. "Not that I know of. There was this terrible wall of bones. I saw shit before, but nothing like this. I'll admit my legs trembled. It was the thing that finally made me snap out of it, but for a few minutes I didn't even know where I was headed. I was so out of it. I just followed the smell of smoke, and I was lucky to find my way back to camp, she answered as she placed 2 pieces of the glob meat on the huge leaf that one of the survivors gave to her. They ate in almost complete silence. The only sounds one could hear was the chewing, the swallowing, and the slurping of tea. 22 people left with the insects and only 6 returned. The atmosphere was grim. It would have been better if none of them came back. At least they would know there was no chance of them coming back, but this way, people were unsure of how long they should stay. As they were eating, they heard sounds again coming from the woods. Some of them didn't even stand up this time, as they now thought that more people were coming back. But others had the complete opposite reaction, thinking this was too much good news for one day. Amir was pulling his wife Imani out of the woods, a swarm of insects covering the exposed part of their bodies. The survivors now instantly knew what to do and helped them to get rid of the creatures with a coordinated attack. Roger noticed a bruise on Imani's face and some blood on the corner of her mouth. He looked at the couple quizzingly. "What happened in there?" he asked. "They led us into some strange cave. That's when I came to be and realized that what we were doing is not at all right. Up to that point, it seemed like the most natural thing to do was to follow these bugs. But Imani didn't want to come. I slapped her so she would wake up," he answered. Some of the people from the group, notably all of the outsiders, gave suspicious looks at him. Amir noticed, of course. "What would you have had me do? Just leave her there?" The question was aimed at nobody in particular, but many of the accusers looked away. It was not a secret that Imani and Amir were Muslims, or at least that seemed to be the closest religion that Roger could compare it to. And it didn't sit right with some of the survivors. There was always tension in the air, but it never escalated into a full-blown conflict until this point. Bruce, an Army veteran who served in a war that Roger had never heard of, stepped forward. "Typical for your kind to hurt women. Come here, sweetie, I'll treat you better," the second party said to Imani, who took a step backwards. "What did you say, man?" Amir asked in disbelief. "What do you mean by my kind?" Apparently they were from the same world but different cultures, and as Roger witnessed, it was not only his world that was ridden with racial, geopolitical, religious, and other kinds of conflicts. "You came to my country to blow up my brothers, and you are all warmongers thriving on endless conflict, trying to rule the world. You murder and rape people, and now you think you're morally superior to my kind. Give me a break." Amir's face reddened as he remembered what Bruce's country did to his own. "You are the scum of the earth, fragile and easy to conquer. Why not protect yourselves? Just a bunch of crybabies. You deserved your fate," Bruce retorted. "Now, hold up. Let's not get overworked here. Remember, yelling and getting angry at one another is going to create noise. That will attract unwanted attention from whatever's in these woods." Roger raised his voice, but lowered it at the end to show that there is no use shouting at each other. Bruce turned to him and approached him, butting up his chest. He got in his face. "And who the fuck made you the leader?" the veteran asked him threateningly. "Only the strong should lead, and you're way too caring. You need to make the hard decision in a split second, and being the leader will destroy you." Roger knew the only reason he chose to be the leader was so that Bruce would never get the opportunity to wield power, which he knew he would use to bully and oppress the weaker survivors. He had put up this show several times before, and his little revolt had always failed. Roger didn't answer, but the survivors started to take up a stance. Almost 60% of the group stood behind Roger, or at least, that's what it usually looked like. A 50-50 split this time, not knowing who had come out in charge. Roger was feeling the pressure. Even Anastasia, who used to support him, was now standing with Bruce. Bruce, seeing that this was going nowhere, said, "Well, why don't we make Anastasia the leader? She's strong and capable. I'm sure she's the best pick. Why don't we all vote on it?" "No," Anastasia shouted. "I'm not going to be the leader again. If I was the leader again, Her eyes drifted away. She became lost in thought. Anna came and put a loving arm around her. "It's okay," she said. "You're not in that place anymore. You're here with me. You're not there." She whispered loving words into Anastasia's ear until she finally came back. "I'm not going to be the leader," she said, stepping away from Bruce and siding with Roger this time. Seeing the tides had shifted back to Roger, he told Bruce to start foraging for food. "Fuck this shit," he finally said and spat on the ground before storming off with his followers. "Mark my words, all of you will understand I was right." Roger hated these moments when he was reinforced in his role as the leader of the group. He would have stepped aside if it was not Bruce who challenged him. But he was a harsh, aggressive man, the kind of people who you should not let be leaders. There was also Anastasia who could lead the group. She had the charisma, but Roger noticed that she refused to take charge in even the direst situations. Also, she was kind of aloof and distrustful. She didn't even let the others treat her wounds. Roger tried helping her in the past, but it must have pushed her away even further, as she stood behind Bruce this time. And it seemed like Anna was the only one who was actually starting to get her to break through her tough shell. The air was full of tension after the standoff between the two groups. Bruce and some of his people broke off the group and they were pacing around the campsite angrily. To not let people brood on what had happened, Roger ordered them to gather supplies. He knew that being idle made things worse. Bruce began pacing back and forth, while some of his underlings found a hole that they believed some kind of mole lived in, and they wanted to pull out for meat. "You guys said I could make it this time, that we can overthrow this asshole. Why do people keep supporting him?" he asked his followers, still raging because of the defeat he suffered. They began murmuring amongst themselves as to what they should do next and where they went wrong. While they were in the middle of this, no one noticed two of the girls leaving the party as they were following a very good-smelling scent. "What is this? Can you smell it?" Tiffany asked her friend Margaret. "Yeah, it's like some kind of orchid. I think it's coming from this direction. We should check it out," she replied, entranced. They found a beautiful flower with huge petals lying on the ground. They walked closer and closer, didn't even notice when the petals started moving. The stalk of the flower straightened, and it suddenly towered over the two women. The petals opened and closed on Tiffany's head, lifting her up. Margaret was unsure what to do as her friend dangled in the air, kicking the plant and beating her hands against it. After a few moments, she stopped moving entirely, and then her body fell to the ground, spraying blood where her head once was. Margaret screamed, which alerted Bruce and his companions. She tried to turn and run away, but was stopped when the plant grabbed her ankles. The head now mounted in the center of the flower, it bent down towards Margaret. "Don't go anywhere," she said. "I'm hungry and you look very tasty." The vines of the plant then crushed her ankles and she screamed out in pain. They arrived on the scene, finding Margaret pinned to the ground. The flower's petals were open. In the center they could see the head of Tiffany. It was attached to the center of the flower, while her body lay on the ground just only a foot away. She was kissing the girl laying in the ground. It then rose up, ripping her tongue out and chewing it as they approached. The plant looked at Bruce with the head, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth, and chewing on the tongue torn from the mouth of the other girl. "It's always nice to have an animal head that can chew. You can get nutrients much faster," she said. The voice was of Tiffany, but there was something inhumane about it, which disturbed the people who gathered there. Bruce stared down at the head as he reached for his gun. He put a bullet in Tiffany's head. She started screaming an ear-piercing scream. Bruce shot even more rounds at the flower. The remaining survivors heard the scream and the gunfire in and around the camp. Roger reached for the radio and told everyone to come back to the camp instantly. Everyone came in except Bruce's team, and Roger noticed that the direction where the scream came from is the same as the one they heard earlier. For a moment he considered leaving them to their own, but that's not what a leader does, he thought to himself. When the remaining group got back, he began designating everybody into teams, who would stay behind and protect the sick and who would go out and help. "Anastasia, I need you to hold up the rear. The others formed several groups who are going to find Bruce," he said, and the others complied with him. They split up close enough they could see each other, but far enough they could each take their own path and move separately. But Anastasia looked like she was not there fully, as if the sounds of the guns took her away to a different place. She must have seen something terrible while she was in the army. Roger turned to Anna. "Can you please stay with Anastasia? She's going to need some support," he asked her. "Sure, dear. Anything for you. I love you," she said, and planted a kiss on his lips before going to the back. They headed out after a few minutes, but they heard several more gunshots while on the way. "Roger, come in. We were attacked by some fucking plants. They are taking our heads and eating us. Send help, please." It was the voice of Gabriel coming from the radio. "Got you. I'll send people over. You went north, right?" Roger tried to act calm, but he was worried. More and more people asked for help. Some reported plant arms ripping through people like it was a corkscrew as it twisted into their bodies and out the other side. Others said they met plants that were shooting fire from their bodies, igniting the people around them on fire. He sent a few survivors in each direction, and there were not many of them left still heading towards Bruce's position. "Roger, there are some big fucking spiders lurking in these woods." It was the voice of Anastasia from the back, and the screaming started after as strangely colored boar-sized furry spiders descended on the back of the group. Roger was stuck in the crosshairs of not knowing what to do, whether he should go back or continue forward. After a few moments of looking in both directions, a voice came back saying that his wife Anna was in danger as she was trying to save the sick people, dragging them to safety. Roger immediately turned back, ordering any of the group not in combat to go back to the main group. "Fucking weed," Bruce said as he trampled Tiffany's head with his boots. He lost the two women, but they'd managed to get rid of the rest of the plants. While doing so, he heard Roger's commands on the radio and how thin the survivors were spread. They didn't even realize that these monsters couldn't pursue, as they were just plants. He took up the radio from Margaret's body and started shouting orders. Assessing the situation, he ordered everyone to abandon fighting the plants. Even if the plants still had survivors, which many of them did, he ordered them to be abandoned to save the larger group. He was in the army, so he knew exactly what he was doing. He was confident none of them had the skills to kill plants and save the people anyway. They would just be expending resources in vain if they continued to fight them. "You have to fight the battles you know you can win," he told everyone. There was also no word from Roger, so even the ones who hated Bruce followed his orders. Once finished, they started heading back to camp. On the way, they found Anastasia. She was holding her own makeshift spear against several spiders that pursued her. She looked exhausted or even scared. "Good God, come quickly. The man is insane, we have to save him," she said, panting, exhausted from all the fighting she's been doing. She lifted a finger and pointed in the direction of Roger. In the middle of the clearing there was Roger fending off several spiders, standing over the dead body of his wife. He looked exhausted and his left wrist was twisted. That hand was flailing around useless. No one was quite sure how he managed not to die, but it didn't look like he was going to last much longer. "What a fool," Bruce said, but this was the first moment he felt respect for the man. At least he was able to show some respect. He had strength even though it was completely foolish what he was doing. Out of the corner of his eye he saw something coming towards his face. He dodged it and hit the next person behind him. He realized that it was a web the spider began pulling the person towards it. He brought his gun to bear on the spider and fired a burst to kill it. He quickly began opening up on the most threatening spiders to his position. After a few bursts, the spiders realized they were taking heavy losses as well as there were many more opponents, and they began to retreat. The group managed to get rid of the spiders quickly, and they stood around the wounded Roger. Bruce knew this was his opportunity. Roger was kneeling over the body of his wife Anna, weeping. "We fought a battle today, a bloody one that could have been avoided. You need a strong leader, not one that will wait around for people to come back from the dead and put you in danger. Indecisiveness is a ruthless killer. Don't you agree, Roger?" Bruce said as he stepped in the middle of the crowd next to Roger. The man looked up at him with a blood and tear-stained face. Then he just lowered his head and went back to his grief. It was decided at that moment that Bruce was in charge. Roger couldn't even fight back anymore without Anna. Both his will and the extra moral support for him and for the rest of the group evaporated with her death. He didn't know what to do. Looking around, there were too many dead bodies. They would never be able to haul them all back to safety and bury them. After the group had reorganized and decided to head out, Roger wanted to stay behind and bury the dead. "You won't make it out alive," Bruce told him. "This forest will kill you before you even get the chance." "I'm going to stay anyway. You got what you wanted. Now go," Roger said to the veteran. They set out and left him behind, but Bruce looked back one more time at the broken man digging a grave to bury his wife. As Bruce predicted, they didn't have far to go before the predators began coming back to feast on the dead. Without the larger group, they weren't afraid to attack one individual. As Roger tried fending off the spiders, once more Bruce lifted his gun, toying with the idea of helping him one last time before he departed. It would be in vain, he realized, as Roger was going to die anyway. Nothing was going to change that. He watched as a spider came down from above, biting him in the back and lifting him in the air as he cried out. Multiple spiders followed the first one, descending upon him, ripping him apart. Bruce turned his back and led the rest of the group away to safety. After all, men like him never truly understood people who thought that love will win out at the end of the day. But they knew the harsh reality that raw strength, and the will to do what the others would never dare to do, decided things at the end of the day. Law and order are not some cosmic rules, but they are dictated and kept up by people who are willing to do anything and to dominate others, no matter the costs. This has been by Leo the Lion and David Pusek.